And yes, we're recording, so you can catch up if you miss the session or you want to see something again. So this module, we're going to delve further into the kinetic energy thresholds for different crash types. We started talking about those, and you saw those curves. We talked about Usain Bolt and then some other crash types and speeds. We're going to delve a bit further into that. We're going to identify characteristics of intersections that align highly with safe system principles and characteristics of mid-block locations that align highly with safe system principles. So mid-blocks, for those who don't use that term often, that's just simply the length of road between intersections. Now, there's just a term that I want to point out in what I've said there that I think it's important for you to start utilizing this. So align highly with safe system principles. So people will often talk about, this is safe system, or this is not, that's not safe system. But really, safe system is it's a spectrum. There is high alignment with safe system principles, there's low alignment with safe system principles. So talking about it as a binary, yet safe system or not safe system, can come with a lot of challenges because, anyway, I think that'll play out as we see what a safe system assessment is. Keep your questions coming in as we go. Fairly shortly, we're going to get you involved in doing a little activity where you'll be doing some intersection changes or coming up with some ideas on intersection changes. So you'll have a good opportunity there to stretch into coffee as well. So that won't be too far into the session, and we'll have a few other opportunities there. But Max is behind the scenes typing away, so we'll get straight into it. We'll start with intersections. Now, obviously, intersections are a point. Well, maybe not obviously, but they're a point in the road environment where we have a spike in risk due to the fact that we have a conflict point. And by a conflict point, I just mean that way that vehicles can crash, or vehicles with pedestrians or vehicles with cyclists can crash because they're trying to cross each other. But we also have an interesting amount of road furniture and infrastructure around intersections. It could be things like traffic signals, for example, so the signal pedestals, it could be power poles, lighting poles. So what we actually see is not just that spike in risk due to this sort of event, but we also see the spike in risk due to runoff road. And you can imagine if you're driving along and somebody pulls out in front of you, your quick reaction skills, you may avoid but leave the road in doing so. So we see a spike in runoff road crashes as well. But I'll delve into that in a little more detail. Monash University Accident Research Centre came up with sort of some very high-level principles for intersection design for safe system alignment. I'm not going to spend long on this, but I think they're worth going through. Don't forget to count your wallies. Interestingly, the first few things they've got there are fewer vehicles, fewer intersections. That's interesting, isn't it? So they're starting out with a couple of principles which aren't really what you might have originally thought. Now, if you remember back at the end of last session, we talked about risk under a safe system assessment being exposure times likelihood times severity. Okay, that's a multiplication symbol. Exposure, likelihood, and severity. Fewer vehicles and fewer intersections are trying to address the exposure to crashes. So that's interesting. Fewer conflict points per intersection. That's an interesting one. We, in a safe system assessment, had that as a likelihood factor. Okay. If you eliminate the conflict points at the intersection, then it would be exposure. If you just reduce them, we call it a likelihood because it's less likely that an individual going through there will crash. And then we get into a whole lot of elements there associated with the severity. And you can see them talking about impact angles constrained to biomechanically tolerable levels. And that's what we talked about, the amount of force that us humans can take before we break. And for the 90-degree collisions, we're talking about that 50 kilometer per hour. And if you can get a bit more angle on that crash, could go up from that. And what we mean by that, and I'll just draw sort of over some of the text here. So if you think back to your year 11 physics or year 12 physics, you did vectors maybe. What we were doing is when we're crashing at those sorts of angles, we're pushing the energy into the environment. We sort of bounce off a bit as well, right? You bounce off. And so the energy is not directed into that other vehicle. So when we can get a bit more angle on a crash, we can start to increase the speed that the occupants of that vehicle can tolerate. Also, interestingly, as you get it a bit more head-on, the front of the vehicle, which is designed incredibly well for crashes, relatively, it starts to kick in more. So the airbags, the seat belts, the crumple zones are all part of the equation in that sense. So then when we're talking about areas with vulnerable road users, and next session, Max and I are going to go through a lot more detail about pedestrian cyclists and motorcyclists, or a bit more detail. But really, when we're not seeing anything above 30 kilometers an hour, where there's that ability for pedestrian cyclists to be struck. Motorcyclists, an interesting one, and we're getting some more recent research and reports on the forces, but they're definitely not up at cars, but they're a little bit more than pedestrians and cyclists. So down the bottom of the whole thing is where these cannot be met, these angles and speeds, we need to reduce crash risk to negligible levels in one way or another. And I'll get back to a bit on that. But anyway, that's sort of high level sort of principle stuff. I'm going to put quite a number of these tables up. So generally, these ones I'm putting up are for passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle crashes. And you'll see when we get to do an assessment matrix that there 3 or 4 of the columns, and then we have pedestrian cyclists and motorcyclists as distinct elements that you're going to analyze. But we can see there the 60 kilometer per hour, got some angles there, and that's from XChemX or ChemX, which is the kinetic energy management model. It's sort of software that you can use to analyze the forces of crashes at intersections with different angles of vehicles and the like. But in a safe system assessment, you do not need to go to that detail, right? You do not need to learn to use ChemX and get that out, right? You are doing this from a broad brush perspective based on this information that you've got there, based on that nice, colorful chart that we gave you last module, and some judgment on how severe crashes could be. And if you're looking at a design of a new intersection, something like this, maybe you could draw some lines and get some precise angles, but you don't need to be that precise. You can certainly be a little more generalized with that. You can be sort of saying, oh, okay, well, vehicles coming out of here and they're going to get struck by that vehicle. That's about 90 degrees. So we'll do 90 degrees, and we'll sort of equate that to about 50 kilometers an hour as generally where things are going to go very bad very quickly. Come out here, okay, they're going to get a bit more angle on the crash. So maybe we can equate that with about 60 kilometers per hour. So you can see that's passenger vehicle to passenger vehicle we're thinking about. Obviously, you're going to have, if it's an area with pedestrians and cyclists, thinking about them crossing there and the like. But Collision angle, we've talked about, but also this interesting one of secondary crashes. So when a vehicles strike each other, it's not often that it's that directly square. There's all sorts of stuff that goes on in these crashes. But the Centre for Automotive Safety Research did a big study of lots of intersection crashes that had secondary crashes occur that cause death and serious injury. So the initial incident occurred at the intersection, and so they've reorientated all of these onto the same axis. So you've got vehicle there, vehicle there. They come in, they have an initial strike, but then there's a secondary crash, which is the one that has, in their opinion, caused the death or serious injury. And you can see that it's obviously in that general area, the bulk of them, but there are some spin-off crashes. There are some ones that go slightly into different areas there. So, you know, that they're interesting ones. That might have been clipping the back of the vehicle and going off into that direction. Maybe I think there had to be an actual collision rather than just avoiding. But maybe, I don't know whether that research needed to be done. It's kind of obvious, but anyway, it's there. But do remember these and keep these in mind. 50 kilometers per hour, 90-degree crash, passenger vehicles, 60-ish kilometers an hour for more angle, 70 for your head-on, your rear end. 80's put there as not feasible, but it is feasible to run an intersection at 80 kilometers per hour if you have some sort of ability to get vehicles up to speed. So if you've got a vehicle going up there, and you've got a vehicle that's managed to get speed, and those two crash, the delta V is what we're interested in, the change in velocity. And that's what's being pushed into the occupants of the vehicle. So that first crash can happen at very high speeds as long as the vehicle's delta V, the difference in speed or the change in speed, is not sort of above these levels. Obviously, in that scenario, you very much need to think about your secondary crashes and where vehicles are going to go in those incidents. But from that first perspective, it's pretty good. All right, Max, anything I need to deal with before I jump into explaining an intersection exercise?
All good. Let's hop into the exercise. Thanks, Ken.
Okay. Well, we are going to give people a few minutes on this one once I explain what their task is. A good few minutes, probably 5 or so at least. So let's jump into it. Here we go. You've got an intersection. You don't know the intersection, or you probably don't know the intersection, but anyway, it's there. It's got a major arterial road on it here. That's a arterial highway. It is a 70 kilometer per hour speed limit. It carries about 21,000, and it's 9%. So 21,000 vehicles a day, 9% heavy vehicles. This is a bus stop over here, so it's a bus route. This is like a drainage culvert, underpass. It's not like an underpass, it's a drainage under structure thing. Some of you will probably be angry at me for my lack of terminology around drainage structures, but it's a big culvert thing. This is a shared path. These are service roads, two-way service roads. This road has a speed limit of 50 kilometers per hour and has 2,000 vehicles a day. Down here, about 400 meters, is a school. This is all residential. That's sort of parkland, floodland area. It's got a right turn lane there. Got a little bit of a Danish offset. Z crossing here, which is, shared path goes to there and then into the middle of the road, and that Z crossing, which I look at and say is the wrong way around, but you would Z, usually you would Z it the other way. So people walk at traffic no matter which way they're going, but it's a somewhat minor issue within the scheme of things. They're probably constrained by some reason or another. They went down that track with the wrong Z on a Danish offset. What else can I tell people about this road? That's probably enough. I'll give it a little look at it from the street perspective. There you go. You can see it's quite busy. There's the bus stop there that we were looking at. You've got the side road there, got lighting, a few trees and power poles. Let's have a look from the other direction. There it is. There's that drainage structure thing. Okay, so that's the scenario. So what I'm going to task everybody with is to alter this intersection and do anything else you want, really, to eliminate death and serious injury going forward in this area. Now, I'm going to constrain you with a few things. First one I'm going to constrain you with is a budget. We're all working to budgets, aren't we? You can have $3 million to upgrade or change this intersection or do other things if you want. You have 3 million. What other constraints? Oh, we've done lots and lots of community consultation. And there's been some political decisions made, and we are not allowed to close this intersection as much as you wanted to. In fact, we've got to let vehicles access in all directions. So they've got to be coming from this way, be able to turn in. They've got to be able to turn out left and right, and they've got to be able to turn in from this direction. Service roads can be reconfigured and changed. There's some access points to the service roads in both directions as well, there if you're particularly interested in that. So yeah, can't close the intersection. I know you wanted to, because that was Monash University Accident Research Centre's first thing. Oh no, that was less vehicles was first thing. Second thing was less intersections. The third constraint I'm going to put on you is you are operating in the current organizational and political environment in which you currently operate. So if you work for a state road controlling authority, you've got to imagine it in your organization, or if you're in a local government, you've got to imagine you're in your local government and what the appetite is and those sorts of things. If you're a consultant, maybe think about some of your clients you work for and the like. So if you're proposing something radical, something different to what is done, have a bit of a think about a strategy for moving that through the system, getting people's approval on that. Yeah. Okay, so there are your constraints. Now, some of you might be going, well, I don't know how much things cost. Yeah, I'm meant to know what, $3 million, that sounds like a lot. Well, you've got at your service the instant cost estimator tool, which is me. So all you have to do is type in a thing and put a cost question mark at the end. And we will, either Max or I will give you an instant cost estimation for implementing it at this intersection. So if you said grade separation, like a flyover, a big flyover with on-ramps and the like, we would say $42.3 million out of budget. But you might come up with other things that you'd just like a cost check on. But if you've got, a general idea, you're welcome to use that. The purpose of the exercise is not to be specific on a costing of infrastructure in that sense. It's the idea of getting us things that align highly with safe system principles. But one last thing I'm going to get you to do, get you to just practice now, is if you come up with an infrastructure change, like, well, I don't know, you say lighting, we need more lighting. If you come up with an infrastructure change like that, I want you to, in brackets, put either an E for exposure, an L for likelihood, or an S for severity. So I want you to say, are we, by doing that, going to change the exposure to crashes, the likelihood of crashes, or the severity of crashes? Okay, so for the lighting one, for example, I would say we're going to add more lighting, or we're going to change all the luminaires to super LED, bright, whatever. I would then say, in brackets, L, likelihood. That is going to alter the likelihood of crashes. It's not going to do anything for any of those variables that alter the severity of crashes, like speed, angle, mass of vehicle, vulnerability of users involved in crash. It's simply giving people the ability to see more, potentially, see more, and be less likely to have a crash. And so we would squarely park that in the likelihood of crash camp. We're not changing the exposure to crashes. The same number of vehicles are going through there, the same number of pedestrians are exposed, the same number of cyclists. We're just having it so they're easier to see at night. Now, I picked that as a completely sort of random example because there is lighting there, and you'd probably need to do a lighting assessment to determine whether it was adequate or not. You're not going to obviously do that because we're only giving you 5 minutes to have a think about this. But but for other things you come up with, you've got to try to put them into exposure, likelihood, or severity. But you could be multiple ones. So you could say, well, that's likelihood and severity. So then you put L and S. Now, I think I've explained this exercise. Max, does it sound reasonable there?
Yeah, I was just curious if there's been a crash history here. Is there any clusters of crashes or any trends we should be aware of, or is that relevant?
Well, it's an interesting question. Is it relevant? And I am less and less in my career driven by crash history. Okay, I can just simply, because if you think about crash history is simply us saying that some risk is presenting itself potentially at this location, or there is some risk presenting itself at this location. But if there are no crashes, it doesn't mean there's no risk there. It just hasn't presented itself in crashes yet. And likewise, if you maybe have one crash, or even sometimes two crashes, it may not represent a risk. It could be due to some inherent randomness and the like. So what I think we're in is an interesting transition here where we want to know crash history, and that's always been the way people identify risk on the road network. I mean, it's so entrenched in not just our industry, but also the community. The community is like, there's not been any crashes there. Why are you doing something? You go, we don't need to wait for these crashes to know that there's high risk there. It's an interesting one because sometimes the community are the other way and they're like, we have to wait for somebody to be killed before you'll do something. And it used to be that you'd sort of go, well, yes. And in fact, you need 2.3 of them killed and then something will happen. But that's like, we're going into a proactive approach. But that being said, if you have an intersection or a spot on the road that has a history of crashes and there is some sort of pattern, it is still a great indicator of future risk. So this one has crashes. So, there's my long-winded way before I actually tell you what all the crashes were. Right turn against, crashes, and it had 3 or 4 of those. I can't remember. I will say 3, and there was about the same exiting crashes right out. Right out crashes. And there are another 3 of those. They were all passenger vehicles to passenger vehicles, and they were the 6 crashes, and they were all in this. They're the serious injury crashes. So serious injuries. There hasn't been any fatalities yet, but 6 serious injuries over a 5-year period, and some minor other rear ends and bumps and scrapes.
The first cost estimation for our estimation tool for you, Ken. How much would it be to signalise this whole intersection?
To signalise the intersection, $1.5 million.
Okay, under budget. What about? Oh, sorry.
Oh, it's set up quite well to be signalised.
What about a roundabout here, Ken? How much would that cost?
Yeah, a roundabout to meet the Austroads Guide to Road Design Part 4B. The 4B is roundabouts. Maybe a mental blank. Yeah,
I think
4B.
It's 4B, yeah.
To meet that, because this is a B double route, to meet the size requirements there, it's going to cost $7.3 million.
Okay, so that's certainly out of budget. But what about a pedestrian overpass? Nice fly over the arterial there, Ken.
Yeah, pedestrian overpass to meet DDA compliance requirements. It's going to be this sort of have some ramps, then it's going to go over, and it's going to have this funky bit down here or something like that. We can do that. Well, it's 3.01, but I'm going to give you a good deal, and you can have it for $2.95 million.
Very good. Speed limit reduction. You could do a good deal for that, couldn't you, Ken?
Yeah, we can do a good deal on a speed limit reduction. I'm going to. Well, some of you might be going, "Oh, well, that'd be like a couple of $1,000." It's actually going to cost you $50,000. Sorry, I know you're thinking you can just whack up the signs, but we need to do a bit of work behind the scenes. There's a process, there's community consultation, there's a period of that, there's then changing some of the electronic systems behind the scenes and inputting it into the GIS speed zoning system. And so we get some consultants involved to do some reviews. So $50,000 all up to change the speed limit.
Very good. A few more costs here for you, Ken. We've got a raised pedestrian crossing. The cost for that guy there.
Yeah, so raised pedestrian crossing is going to, well, okay, I suppose it depends. Are we talking a like signalised pedestrian crossing or pedestrian operated signals, or just a raised sort of example like a wombat crossing? Anyway, I'll give costs for both. The raised sort of wombat style crossing, if you're doing it across the main arterial, is going to cost you $200,000. Again, some sort of decent costs associated with some other things going on there. To do something along the minor road, we're going to be able to do that for $120,000.
Trimming some trees, and the question is, will the community agree to trimming some vegetation there, Ken?
Well, the community love their trees in this area, so they're not going to be too happy, but if you've got a good case to put forward, that could be something that they will consider. And cost-wise, trimming trees, yeah, under $5,000.
Okay, I think that's all the costs so far. We might give some people some time to explore those ideas and see what kind of treatments we get out.
Yeah, so what, we're going to give people another, 3 minutes, 4 minutes? And feel free to pop a cost question in as you go, but just think of your ideas, and then you're going to write them into the chat, and you're going to put in brackets exposure likelihood severity, or E, L, and S after each of your ideas. And then we'll have a chat about those when we return. We'll give it another minute or so, Max, and I'll just have a bit more of a read here of some of the ideas. I'm liking the fact that lots of people are putting an E or an S or an L there for exposure or likelihood or severity. Yes, you can close service roads just if you want. There's other access points, not the main one. We can't close that side road off. There's lots of good ideas coming in here, Max.
I'm struggling to keep up with all these ideas.
One person in this group has a significant advantage.
I suspect they may know where this site is.
They have worked on it themselves. Make a chuckle to themselves, no doubt. Good to. Good to have you on board, Mike. All right. I think, Max, we better start having a chat about this. And we should have a think. Sorry, I'm just reading a couple more that are coming in. I'm loving it. So let's have a chat about some of these ideas. And first of all, I want to say well done. This is wonderful input and some great ideas coming in there. So we're seeing some people that are wanting to signalize the intersection, okay? And most of the people talking about signalization of this intersection are talking about the likelihood of crashes. A few people have slightly mistaken it and thought about maybe exposure there for signalization. Signalization in a safe system assessment, we just purely put into the likelihood of crashes. And the reason for that is that we know people, are less likely to crash when we're giving that direct advice or direct direction to say stop or go. So it's less likely that people crash, but it certainly does not eliminate the idea of crashes. There's just less of them going to happen. People certainly will still crash, run red lights, make mistakes. So less likely to happen. We're not addressing the severity there, and the exposure we don't say we address because the same number of vehicles are still going through there, the same number of pedestrians, same number of cyclists. We may, if you have traffic modeling and it discovers that by doing that, you get a whole lot of increase or something like that, then we've got an exposure change. But if you just take the assumption that it's going to stay about the same number of vehicles, number of pedestrians, number of cyclists, then we've got the same exposure. So it's a likelihood one. We had the interesting one of people asking, toying with the idea of roundabouts. Could a roundabout go? And people thinking, well, roundabouts will slow speed down, and so the severity will be less. And good idea. Couldn't afford the full-size roundabout there. So then we've got some ideas on creating cycling facilities through there, better cycling facilities, and we haven't got people sort of specifying whether that's exposure, likelihood, or severity. We've got the idea of a compact roundabout, so a smaller roundabout. So yes, I did say, in accordance with Australia's Guide, Part 4B, it's this massive beast of a thing. But could we go something smaller with maybe some raised platforms on the approach? And that would reduce the severity of crashes. Would it reduce the likelihood of crashes? In some circumstances, but we generally would put that in the camp of severity of crashes. I'll talk you through that more later. But the idea of utilising that service road for a bidirectional bike lane, that's a wonderful use of existing infrastructure there. So that's a nice idea and some reconfiguration. Why not take advantage of that? Now, would we call that exposure, likelihood, or severity? I would call it likelihood, just for a few reasons. Most likely the way it's going to be, Peter said there, bike lane, I think there's still the ability for vehicles to get into that, or certainly however that crosses this road, we're going to have some sort of conflict there that we need to deal with and design for and cater for. But certainly I think that idea lessens the likelihood of crashes involving vehicles and bikes, and a really good idea. So then the idea of this pedestrian overpass came in as reducing the exposure to crashes. And that's correct. That is correct. The pedestrians that use that facility are not exposed to that crash. So there will be less. Now, will all the pedestrians use that facility? Well, that'll be for you to work out with how it's designed and a whole lot of other ideas around that. But the thing is, it reduces the exposure to crashes. And Prue had a really wonderful idea that I'm always excited by is, could we utilize this drainage structure somehow? We've already somebody's already spent lots of money. Could we go under there with the pedestrians and cyclists and reduce exposure that way? And it may be much friendlier than having to climb up this very high structure and go. So that may be a possibility. Obviously, you'd want to do a lot of site inspections and look at heights and what would need to be done, and lighting and how it would how drainage would work. We did a little safe system snippet on this not that long ago, and people get freaked out by this idea. Oh, the people will drown for sure. I really don't think that they'll be going in there when it's there's significant water going through, and we can manage that in a much better way and utilize the infrastructure. Practical reality in this case, it's far too small. You can't see that from up here. It looks very very good for that, but the idea is wonderful and should be thought about a lot. So now we've got some people wanting to raise the intersection when they signalise it. That's an interesting idea. And that's the likelihood of crash with the signals and the severity of crash. Because if it's a raise, vehicles have to slow down. And if they strike each other or pedestrians, the severity will be less. Now, I'm not going to get through everybody's here, but this is wonderful, wonderful stuff. We do have lots of people looking at that 70 kilometre per hour main drag speed limit and wondering whether they can reduce that and get benefits on. Some people are saying severity, some people are saying likelihood, some people are saying both. And I would say you will get benefit out of both. Lower travel speeds for passenger vehicles is less chance a crash happens because there is more time to see something, avoid, but the severity of crashes is lower as well because when the strike happens, it's at lower speed. So people wanting to reduce speeds even lower than that. Now, people wanting to put some warning signs up, active advanced warning signs and the like. Now, they will reduce the likelihood of crashes. Anything really sign related, warning related, line marking related is a likelihood factor. You're just trying to lessen the chance that the crash happens. Unless you're actively getting their speeds reduced with the signage somehow, you're not going to be addressing the severity of the crash. Very nice idea for signalization with fully controlled right turns. So that's the fully controlled right turn. So that's the red arrow for the turner, reduces the likelihood of crash. That's a likelihood factor. So really anything associated with that signal, those signals, stop, you can stop or go or can't turn right, that is a likelihood factor. Something to do with the speeds, the angles, the weight of vehicles, the vulnerability of roads, then we're into some of the severity factors. So very good stuff there. I'm going to keep looking down. Oh my God, Max, this is just excellent stuff. Bear with me. Anything pop out to you there, Max, that you really wanted to mention?
I was going to mention the guardrail at the culvert. We've got a few suggestions there and correctly identified those to do with severity. Now, I might let you expand on that, Ken.
Yeah, no, spot on. So the idea that if a vehicle leaves the road and drops into the culvert, there's a crash and it's going to be of decent severity. If we put a barrier to protect that. So we put a nice barrier down there, probably not going to go into the road with the barrier like that, but a vehicle leaves the road, hits a barrier. There is still a crash happening there, okay? Crash is less severe because they will most likely be redirected and not fall into that culvert. So it is a severity factor There is sometimes where you put barrier systems in and you will increase the likelihood of crashes. So maybe if you put a barrier system along here, you've all of a sudden closer to the road, put something that a vehicle can hit. So they're more likely to be involved in a crash, but the severity will be so much lower. But anyway, that's a good point. Thank you. That was a good one. Some people want to move this bus stop down there, I think is what they're saying. Now that's going to be a likelihood factor as well. So certainly, if it's in an area where there's a lot of disruption happening and the like, that's going to lessen the likelihood of crashes. Max, I think it was excellent. I kind of want to say give everybody a prize, but I think we'll give nobody a prize instead. But well done, everybody. But I'm gonna sort of talk through some of that thinking in a bit more detail, and we're going to hone in on a few of those specific ideas that people came up with and how they relate to safe system principles. And then I'll show you what the wonderful region did at this location. So a lot of you on that signals idea, and as I mentioned here, and you're going to see me put this little box in a lot of slides coming up, because I'm really wanting you to start getting good clarity around what alterations in our infrastructure change exposure or likelihood or severity. And sort of a little window into how you do an assessment is you need to score exposure and likelihood and severity for different crash types. So you need to be able to justify each of those. So be very clear on what fits into what category. So signals are a likelihood reducing bit of infrastructure. But it's interesting to sort of look at traffic signals, and you can do this around pretty much any major city in Australia and New Zealand, and you'll find the same thing. And so what we've done here is we just grabbed a heat map. So we just GIS death and serious injury over a 10-year period, and set the hotspot going. So the more intense the hotspot, the more death and serious injury. And this is sort of an outer suburban Melbourne. This one is sort of around the Springvale area, but you could do it for Brisbane, you could do it for Sydney, Newcastle, Auckland, the outer areas. And what we're seeing here are just hotspots of death and serious injury. And each one that I'm circling now is a large signalised intersection. Doesn't that make you scratch your head a little bit? Really? Signals. If you plot, or if you get the data on your state or your city, or your state's top 100 intersections for death and serious injury, the bulk of them are going to be large signalised intersections. Like the significant bulk of them. And the challenge is there, or the reason we always find that is because people have got to this point of it's going to be, we've signalised it, now we've put in the fully controlled right turns, and we've put in red light cameras and speed cameras, and they just go, well, it's the road users. They've got to start following the rules. And the interesting thing is we just keep building these and thinking we're going to get a different result. And the interesting one is in a lot of these outer growth areas and the like, what we're finding is that there was a roundabout there and the volume of traffic increased and that became saturated, and they go, we're going to duplicate this road, or whatever they're doing. We'll rip the roundabout out, put traffic signals in, because we can get a bit more capacity out of that. Actually, Max, in a second, I'm going to go and I'm going to pick something out of my archives from my time at the Road Safety Department. But I'll explain roundabouts first, but remind me if I forget.
Yeah, no problem.
The roundabouts, and it was nice to see a few people straight off the bat questioning, could we get a roundabout in? Roundabouts are really, in a safe system assessment, we give them the severity reduction. And the reason for that is the lower speeds people go through them, the better crash angles. So they're two immediate ones. But look at the sort of size of this, the amount of land. And that's because the large vehicle that needs to come in needs to sweep around and be able to do that move. The other thing, and many of you are very good traffic engineers and understand all of that, is that roundabouts don't perform as well from a traffic perspective, especially when there's unbalanced flow like we had. Now, obviously, this is not the same site. If anybody's going, well, is that the same site? No, it's not the same site. But if you have low sort of volumes on one and then heavy volumes on the other, it's this unbalanced flow and it doesn't tend to perform that well. Mind you, I do like the idea of metering roundabouts when you're in these situations where maybe you could put a set of traffic signals up here as a lovely pedestrian crossing and maybe a nice, crossing path there. But these could also trigger when the queues of vehicles on this road gets down, and you could, trigger that to a red, link that to that, and then that some of them could distribute out, and then you could keep going again. So win-win, better crossing for pedestrians, cyclists, and some metering there as well.
Just going to say those art classes are coming along very well, Ken. That's a beautiful sketch you've got there.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to use some other colours. But why do roundabouts need to be that big? I like the fact that somebody popped in there a compact roundabout. This is actually not what I would call a compact roundabout. This is what I call a mini roundabout. You can see it's just paint. But why, again, very different road environment, and you can't, say that we could have put one of those there at the site you were looking at. But this is a really interesting one out of the UK, and UK love a mini roundabout. But why are we getting such good safety benefits out of these? And we do get really great safety benefits, as well as some good traffic flow benefits also as well. The big reason on this is not the deflection, which we often talk about as one of the great reasons, conflict angles and the like. The reason is that every vehicle approaching this, or more accurately, no vehicle approaching this believes they have ultimate priority. Each one is slowing down to look around because they may or may not be able to enter that intersection safely. And so what we immediately get is this enhanced sort of awareness and looking around of vehicles and some slowing down. This is kind of the UK equivalent of the American four-way stop. And I'm occasionally seeing four-way stops popping up in different parts of Australia and New Zealand, and really enjoying that. I think there's such merit to that, because we get most of our problems when a vehicle is traveling at speed and just, continues traveling at speed. And if you can break up that at conflict points, we're in a big win. Mini roundabouts. If you're worried about some of the approach speeds and things, of course, you can do raised bits to slow vehicles down on the approach roundabouts, which is working quite well. And I've got lots of different guidance available on this stuff. But roundabouts have other advantages too. We do see less conflict points. The conflict point being just simply the way you can crash compared to a signalised intersection or a give way / stop controlled intersection. They're just all the crash ways between passenger vehicles. Okay. Now, pedestrians and cyclists becomes an interesting one. So what we see is the pedestrians and cyclists. Pedestrians do not like roundabouts, and I'm sure you've faced the same. You don't like having to cross at these roundabouts. The severity of crashes is often lower, but we certainly see people avoiding crashes, and likelihood of crashes is up a bit. And it's certainly a major impediment to a lot of people walking as well, old people, young people, or parents letting young people and the like. So some issues around vulnerable road users. And Max will talk a bit more about cyclists, and I'll talk a bit more about pedestrians and roundabouts in the next session. But from a severity perspective, everything's still brought down. The challenge at signalised intersections is when crashes happen, it's often somebody running the red light. In fact, that's somebody is running the red light. That's what's happening. Or, you know, pedestrians walking out. It's like the speed is high, thus the severity is high. And we've got all of these extra conflict points as well. The angle is better at a roundabout compared to some of the crashes that can happen at signalised intersection. And this is the one to say, you know, as a vehicle approaches, I've talked about before, they don't have ultimate priority. Also, if there's a lump of infrastructure in the middle of the road that they've got to navigate around, they wake up. People are driving in all sorts of states of consciousness. And we don't like that, but that's the reality of it. Sometimes they've worked a double shift. Sometimes they're a bit drug affected. Sometimes, you know, they're thinking about their fight they've had there with their partner. And to have infrastructure pull them back to reality is just an amazing thing to be able to do. And a roundabout does that. And in fact, any sort of deflection on the road environment does that. So that's horizontal deflection around a roundabout, or vertical deflection over a hump or the like, or the approach to the hump. They will come back to reality, navigate their feature, and then go back into whatever world they're in. Now, we don't, like, this is the thing, we're always talking about alert and compliant road users. Well, unfortunately, they're not in that camp all the time. So if we can get this at areas of high risk, we're in a great position. So that's my little slide to remind of that. So let me go, before I jump into some different roundabouts and discussion, let me actually stop sharing for a second, Max. I want to see if I can find something briefly. Because I'll give the history of it as I'm looking, if that's all right. So it's in the road safety department at Vic Roads quite a while back. And there was like this massive congestion easing government investment. It was like the world, you know, not the world's biggest, but like the biggest congestion easing program anybody had ever seen. And it was called, I think it was called Keep Melbourne Moving, I think was the thing. But basically it was like ripping roundabouts out and replacing them with traffic signals, because the modeling and everything was showing you get far better, you know, or you get better, not far better, you get better flow of traffic during peak periods. Okay. And so those were all coming into the road safety department. The designs were coming in for road safety review, road safety audit, and we were getting them and we're looking at them and going through them. And what I think the regions were expecting from this was, you know, us to comment on, you know, the line marking here should be different, or the phasing here is not right, or you need to use slip-based poles in these locations, or use joint rear mast arms here, or these sorts of things. But we started developing and sending out this one, and I have found it, so I will share it with you. Here it is. So I hope you can see that. And I took a copy of this after I left. So this is the memo shell. So it was, you send it off. Here we go. Yeah. So the road safety department has analysed this project as increasing crashes as follows. Project life, 20 years. Number of deaths attributed to this project, 2.3. Number of serious injuries attributed to this project, 12.6. Statement of acceptance. So the above road trauma is accepted by, and send it off to the regional manager or regional directors these days, aren't they, for a signature. So that was the covering note on the return of the design. Now,
and that was obviously well received by upper management there, Ken.
It certainly was not. We never got one back signed. We certainly got, myself and a colleague got hauled into the executive director's office, and a lot of commentary around, not understanding the obligations of a road authority and the varied balances that need to be made, and the importance of easing congestion and the like. But the reality is that we just were saying this is going to make road safety worse, and somebody needs to stand up and sign off on that. And yes, intentionally causing a bit of ruckus, but sometimes you need to do that to break up the usual. Now, the reason I thought of bringing that up is because you don't need to do that these days. I mean, you can if you want, and I can show you how to calculate those numbers pretty easily. But you don't need to do that, because we have a safe system assessment which will quantify that and show that with some scores, not quite as in your face as here, sign off on killing and seriously injuring this many people. But safe system assessments will do that, and I'll show you a little bit later on that it's quite heartening to see that it would be very challenging to rip out a roundabout and replace with traffic signals without doing some other severity works these days. Although it does still happen. Occasionally I do dust off the memo. Anyway, let me get back into where we were at. Oh, gone back to the same memo, have I?
Nothing shared. No, nothing shared just yet. It's still blank.
I disappeared for a second, did I?
You did. It was very stressful.
Don't get worried, Max. You've got all the content ready to go.
I do.
We're back.
There we go. Good stuff.
Okay. Well, I took a tangent there. Oh, getting the old memo out. Okay. We were talking about roundabouts, yeah. But roundabouts, so that whole sort of little story I was telling about that time, roundabouts have some challenges around, you can't pump as many vehicles through there at some points in time, although I always question the traffic modelling when they do peak periods only. You're like, well, that doesn't really work, because what about all the other hours of the day where people are sitting at red lights for no reason? If it was a roundabout, they'd be able to go through, but so can we do this across the whole day? Yeah, okay, the peak periods aren't going to perform as well, but the other periods are going to perform better. So anyway, it's another debate. But we know not all roundabouts are the same, and we get better and worse outcomes at different roundabouts. Pretty much all of them are still performing better than most traffic signals in higher speed environments. But you can see here an interesting little chart of speed and inner radius of roundabout, and we see there that smaller radius multi-lane roundabouts don't perform that well. Speed is often a good proxy for crash rates. Single lane roundabouts are better, and turbo roundabouts are performing pretty much the same as single lane roundabouts from that perspective. Now, turbo roundabout, just for your interest, is a roundabout. It's a dual lane roundabout, but you have a raised separator on the approach and throughout the circulating carriageway there. So if you want to, go right, you've got to get yourself in that right lane, get into your sheltered right, and then around you go. Here's another turbo roundabout. I love this aerial image, because have a look at what's going on over here. We've got a truck that's obviously entered the roundabout with a vehicle coming, but look at the angle that's happening. It's beautiful. And we know it's going to be low speed, don't we? So you're seeing a mistake going on right there, but we know that it's not going to result in death or serious injury. Just to do speeds and angles. And this is an interesting little roundabout. This is a massive roundabout, isn't it? It's a beast, and it's a turbo roundabout, and it's signalized as well. So it's got signals as well as the roundabout structure. It's out of the Netherlands, and I flipped it around so because it would be very confusing if you were trying to think about it driving on the right. But the reason I popped this one in is we had a Dutch engineer who we brought over to. We were delving into cyclist roundabouts actually, and the like. But I showed him this one. I said, "This is just fascinating. I was amazed by it." Asked a bit about some things around traffic volume and the like. I said, in Australia, that would be a large signalised intersection until maybe at some point it got grade separated, right? But it would be a large signalised intersection at 70, 80 kilometres per hour. This was a few years ago. And he goes, with raised platforms. I said, probably not. And he's like, but what about all the death and serious injury that would happen? And I'm like, yeah, I know. And he's like, he could not fathom that you would do that to your community. And which just sort of gave me that, we just think about this in a bizarre way, don't we? But they would, yes, rather, acquire the land, spend the money, have this sort of operation than the idea of leaving that residual risk to their community. Very interesting. And of course, we won't talk too much about the wonderful cycle facilities yet, but complete cycle underpasses and the like. But it is interesting to see this philosophy sort of playing out in what we've got with our large signalised intersections. And the question really becomes, how do you disrupt the driver from that straight, fast run? And what ways can we do that with still acknowledging on some of these heavy traffic routes that we're going to try to keep capacity up or improve capacity? People are coming up with ideas like this one, the cut-through roundabout. Now, the philosophy of it is really good. People get freaked out by this. I think if they actually built it, and it is an artistic mock-up, it hasn't actually been built. But if there was to be built, I think if you were on the ground, it wouldn't be as scary as it looks from up here. But the idea being that a vehicle coming in here is going to see the roundabout, it's going to slow down, is going to improve their angle, and there's just winds all around. But as quite a few people were alluding to, can we utilize vertical deflection, raising the intersection, raising parts of the intersection? Now, back when I started my career, if I'd suggested that on that road you were looking at, with 21,000 vehicles a day, 9% heavy vehicles, bus route, I would have been kicked out of the office. I would have been, you come back tomorrow when you thought about what you just said, it would have been just ludicrous, that idea. It's a highway, it's the arterial road, it's got freight, it's got, emergency vehicle. We don't do vertical deflection on these roads. But thankfully, we've evolved. And now it is very legitimate to look at, can we provide some sort of raised feature on these high-speed roads? And I'm not talking about your local urban speed hump, right? We can alter the grade to try to cater for different speeds and different vehicle types and the like. And so the region, in this case, looked at this one and did some analysis, very similar to what you all did in 5 minutes, but it took a lot longer than that. But also looked, and came up with this conclusion: signalisation is probably the appropriate treatment. And there's signals down the road, which I didn't tell you about, both ways. and unbalanced flow and signalization is probably the go. And to their credit, they said, well, but are we willing to just know that there's going to be this residual death and serious injury? And some people, can we do more? And they opted for raised platforms on the approach there. Not raising the whole thing in this case to save some money, but also the fact that it's not required to raise the whole thing, because what they were particularly interested in is reducing the speed of the bullet vehicle. This is the one that's going to do the damage. This one turning in or this one coming out, they're not the bullet vehicle, they're the target vehicle. You don't need to disrupt their speed because it's a T intersection. You don't need to disrupt their speed. You want to disrupt the speed of the target vehicle. Now, the cyclists and pedestrians will sort of put that to the side for the moment, and we'll come back to that at a later point. But the idea is a good one. And what sort of speed, actually I'll ask this, first one to put it in, what sort of speed when they're thinking about that bullet vehicle, that exiting vehicle, do you think that the Ridge was trying to get the speed of that bullet vehicle down
to? Prue was in there pretty quickly with 50 kilometers per hour there, Ken.
Yeah. Yes, well done, Prue. So I was specifically saying there, the vehicle to the vehicle exit, vehicle to vehicle, and it's about a right angle, isn't it? It's about a right angle there. And remember, 50 or below is what they were aiming at. Now, yes, if you're really focused on the pedestrians, it would be 30 or below, and that would be nice. But this is where they sort of get themselves to a balance of saying, well, going from 70 to 30 on this with all of that stuff is a challenge. There are low pedestrian numbers. We're reducing the likelihood of pedestrian crashes with a whole lot of good features. So, in the balance of things, that's how this one played out. But yeah, remember that 50 for passenger vehicle right angle crashed. And there you go, it was built. Okay, this is not just pie in the sky ideas anymore. This is a while back now. Almost 5 years back. You can see there advisory 50s. Now, eventually, well, the speed limit actually got reduced, but that was never the first intention. The first intention was to do it with advisory speeds. And people are far more accepting of advisory speed limit reductions than regulatory speed limit reductions. When you give them the option to slow down because of infrastructure, they don't get too angry. I mean, you put a roundabout in, for example, people don't jump up and down about the speed issue. They jump up and down about some different things occasionally. But the idea is that they have to slow down to navigate this, but it's their choice to do it. They're not going to get a speeding ticket if they don't slow down, but they will, and they never complain about that. So this is a similar idea. And there you go, you can see a bit more of it. And there's a photo I took while I was out there having a look at some different aspects of it. And I love this photo. I love the fact that we've got a vehicle slowing on the approach to a green light. It's so exciting. Now, some people get really angry about this. This is so inefficient. Like, if it was a roundabout, everybody would be slowing down. We'd be seeing lots of brake lights, and nobody would bat an eyelid about this. It's just that we're so used to signals and just getting this free, fast run through it that people are annoyed. But you can see here that we're now ticking the boxes of both of them. And some of you put this into your idea. We're reducing the likelihood of crashes because we've got signals, and signals are going to help pedestrians cross as well, but it's clearly doing that. But when bad things happen, they're going to be slower. And this is another interesting one. And there's data coming out of different raised intersections, raised platforms and the like to show that the dilemma zone also tightens. So the dilemma zone, for those that aren't familiar with that term, is that point in time and space as a vehicle approaches an intersection where the driver is in a dilemma as to whether to put the foot down and go or brake. I'm sure you've been in the dilemma zone before. That's actually its term. Some terms in road safety or in road infrastructure that I just go, whoever named this is brilliant. Like dilemma zone and trap lane are two of the big ones for me. Just such good naming. Dilemma zone. Yeah, so it tightens the dilemma zone because the majority of vehicles now in more area of the road and time and space are deciding to stop, to pull up at that intersection. So another win. So some pretty exciting stuff there. And what is also really exciting to see now is that there is a lot more, of these going in when areas are being altered. Like this one, for example, which is, it used to be a roundabout, and guess what? It got ripped out because of congestion or congestion easing and replaced with a set of traffic signals. But hey, at least in this case, and with safe system assessments pushing, there was the decision to use race safety platforms to lower vehicle speeds through there to around the 50 kilometers an hour. Now, yeah, I'd probably like to see at least slip lane to be 30. That would be nice. But we might want to see lower for some other reasons. But we're on a really good journey here of not accepting these high speeds through these conflict points in these areas. So that's exciting. And there's lots of different documents available now. We've got race safety platform guidelines from the Victorian government. There's a wonderful Austroads project report. I thought I had a slide with the Austroads one that was recently released, which is analyzes 12 or something raised intersections on major roads. There's a recent evaluation that's been done on these arterial roads. There's a lot of excitement and interest. So if you're in a jurisdiction that doesn't do this currently, get ready, because I reckon it's coming and you can be involved in that. If you are in jurisdictions that are doing it, you're getting an understanding of why. And when you assess from a safe system perspective, you can see that this is a viable option for recommendation on some of these higher speed intersections. And you can see some of the advantages you can get. Max.
Just a quick one for you. I was just trying to filter through the records, but do you know how much this one cost to actually build, to install?
Well, I think, I don't know exactly. I picked the 3 million mark because I think it was somewhere around that with the extra features and the like. But I think there was a lot of sort of consultation, design reports, design reviews, design committees, building of the similar or a few grade ramps down on Gundog Lane, which was so that the buses and the trucks and the motorcyclists could all go drive the profile on a different road. So when they come and jump up, you can't bloody do this. You go drive that and see what actually is like. Not what's in your mind of the, this, Dukes of Hazzard flying off the road style thing. No. It's gentler than that, and it was a very neat, elegant consultation technique there, and the evaluations of this are showing very minimal issues associated with some of the things people were super concerned by, which were like rear end crashes are going to go off the charts. There'll be people hitting this and losing control and flying off the road. These are not playing out. I mean, of course, people are visualizing that risk in their mind, but and as I say, recently released evaluation report on 7 of these showing just wonderful outcomes from a safety perspective and minimal impact on traffic, actually. Okay, we're going on time, Max.
Pretty well.
Maybe should we give everybody just a minute to stretch and then we'll jump on to a couple of other things?
No problem. Give me some time to catch up on some comments.
Okay, great. Okay. So Max, I think we'll put that Crossroads document into the resource folder there, the raised safety platforms document. And yeah, this one, which is an older version of a design note. Just a quick one on sort of similar thinking. And again, we're not necessarily talking about these specific treatments or these scenarios of these treatments. It's more the philosophy of how people are very consciously trying to address severity of crashes now, not just the likelihood. And I'm loving to see that. So here's another example of a intersection, high-speed environment, and arterial road sort of snakes around that way. And because of this thing, which is a telecommunication exchange and the property boundaries and things, and they had a lot of concerns about crashes. They wanted to put a roundabout in, but you know, big thing, huge cost moving this. So yeah, it went back to, oh well, we'll just do right turn lanes and upgrade the lighting a bit and do bits and pieces. But you know, still such high speed, high energy crash potential at this location. So this was one where, and somebody, you know, mentioned that compact roundabout. So the idea of a smaller roundabout, can that work? And you lose the deflection. So a larger roundabout will have, in a lot of jurisdictions, reverse curves on the approach to try to slow vehicles with a chicane, essentially. And then you've got the, if you have the larger roundabout, there's a big deflection around that. So you get some really good slowing of vehicles that way. So to try to, you know, address vehicle speed on the approach, it was looked at again some raising of the road using raised platforms and raising the intersection and going with a very small roundabout in the middle and a larger concrete apron. So a larger vehicle can track over that and make their move. So that one's the Lance Creek roundabout, and some of you have probably seen it, but you know, fairly shallow, raised, hit on the approach, slowing vehicles down, slowing vehicles through there, little circulating, little radius roundabout, big concrete apron, didn't have to move the building, only had to take a little bit of land. Cheaper outcome, much cheaper, proving again to be really great in terms of the safety benefit and issues not occurring. So lovely one. And again, safe system assessments involved in that whole process where those first ideas of, oh, we'll add a right turn lane, we're going to do this. The safe system assessment sort of just reminding that that's going to improve road safety a little bit, but it's not going to get us that big drop in safety the way this does. Big drop in death and serious injury, big improvement in safety the way this does. So it's a qualitative, in your face, that's why these sorts of things are better. Now, I do have a little quiz here. Max, hopefully that one's ready to go.
Yes, let's launch this guy.
Little poll, remember you're not being marked on this.
So hopefully everyone can see that up on their screen.
Yep.
True or false, traffic signals are not safe system. Is it true? Is it false? Is it unintelligible? Meaning that's not a very clever thing to be asking, Ken.
Yeah, that's not, yes, that's nonsensical. Now, Max, there is an assignment for people to do at the end of this session, isn't there?
That's right. So I'll be running through that at the end of this session. So you know exactly where to find it and what to do.
And it's not a long assignment, isn't it? So they don't need to cancel their weekend plans.
No. We certainly hope it's not taking more than 10, 15 minutes. That's kind of what we'd allow for it.
Yeah.
I've got everyone participated, so I'll end the poll there and I'll share the results to see the variation in responses. Over to you, Ken.
Yes, well done to everybody there. I was angling an unintelligible question for two reasons. The first reason is that you'll notice that the question uses the binary, this is safe system, this is not, which is not a good way to talk about things. And the second one is you've got no context, right? Because in a very low speed environment and everything like that, traffic signals could be very, very well aligned with safe system principles. In a very high speed environment, with it may be very poorly aligned with safe system principles. So I will, say that possibly the people who said true had that particular context in mind in terms of high speed environments with nothing to slow vehicles down, and maybe those who said false thought about, well, it's not the signals that are safe system or not, or highly aligned or not. It's the context and the whole environment. So there is you can say everybody's correct as long as they were thinking in the right way. But the reason I put that in is, amazingly, out of this course, some people came out of it with this impression that the traffic signals themselves were non-safe system. And it's of course not the case. It's the context of it in that environment and how it all plays out. Thanks, Max. Let's quickly talk about lane departure, because a lot of sort of similar thinking applies in terms of likelihood, severity, exposure. And we've got a big, long road like this, goes on for 200, 300 kilometers straight, separated by white lines, sealed shoulders, edge lines, bit of cleared area, some trees, some farmland and the like. Somewhere around 4,000 vehicles a day chugging up and down there. Without knowing much more than that, maybe just type in, what do you think the crash types that will be happening along this route? Crash types. I saw it coming in there very clearly there. Most people are right on it. It is run off road and head on. With passenger vehicles is overwhelming crash types on these hundreds of thousands of kilometers of this type of road we have out there. There are little spikes of different other crash types that occur, but predominantly it's people falling asleep, being distracted, and drifting out of their lane, and most often actually drifting out of their lane to the left, because that's the way that the road's shaped to drain water off, drifting out of their lane to the left, waking up or coming back to reality while they're off the road and yanking the wheel back, and then all sorts of chaos happens. Sometimes they shoot across to the right-hand side of the road, sometimes they yaw into the roadside, sometimes they roll over, sometimes they hit another vehicle as they're coming back. But it's quite a chaotic event from there on, and all happening at very high speed. We do see some drift off occasionally into a head-on scenario, but quite a variety of things. We know it is inherently risky, and the energies are nowhere near what we can handle. And we know that those point source hazard, those poles, I talked about the 29 km/h. That's the 29 km/h test. It's now gone to 32, or the pole crash. And we are so far away from being able to withstand that energy of those side crashes where a vehicle yaws, that's sliding, and hits a pole like that. And here's one which it's quite disturbing, this one. But to see, and it was estimated at 60 kilometers per hour. And this is more the violence of these crashes. The energy dissipation in that is just staggering. So the thought then would be to let's remove all of those point source hazards off the roadside. The trees, the power poles, potentially even the culvert, culvert head walls and those sorts of things. Like, can we just clear this back? And surely that will give us the best alignment with safe system principles. Well, there's been a lot of research and studies into this. And the idea of a clear zone, which I'm sure is a term that many of you have heard of. Let's clear an area free of hazards, fixed hazards. Interestingly, we see that the run-off road casualty crashes per 100 million VKTs. Prize, Max, for the person who tells me what VKT stands for first. I'll give out a few more prizes.
Vehicle kilometer traveled by Tegan.
Well done.
Well done, Tegan.
I mean, that's just getting you back to a relative ability to compare like for like with the number of vehicles and how far they're traveling. So you can compare a road with lower volume and higher volume, but in a relative sense. But isn't it interesting? It's sort of this asymptotes out at about a little over 4 run-off road casualty crashes per 100 million VKT. But we're clearing all the trees and all the poles. What's going on there? Well, we introduced this rollover crash, but we also, it's amazing how far vehicles are going beyond these clear zones, some of the vehicles. So interestingly, you'll find the clear zone and the old traditional clear zone thinking does not exist in, well, Victoria at least, but it's out. It is not used anymore. The new Austroads Guide to Road Design Part 6 does not talk about clear zones. Clear zones are ancient now. So if you're somebody who's still churning out the clear zone thinking, maybe your jurisdiction's still catching up and working out how they're going to do this. But the reason for that is that the old clear zone way of thinking was like you calculate your clear zone based on the volume and the speed and the curve radius and these sorts of things, and you get this number. And it would often come out like, okay, it comes out at 9 meters, for example. People were, and I'm sure they weren't sort of consciously doing it, but say that's 9 meters there, right? And that's what you've calculated as your clear zone. And this is risk. People were operating as though risk was like, went like this. Like at, 8.9 meters, that's risky. 9.1 meters, it's fine. Like it didn't make, it just didn't make sense. And you might say, oh, but people were building new roads and planting trees at 9.1 or, whatever it was calculated, 9.1, putting all their power poles down there and these sorts of things. So just how it was being used was sort of not appropriate. And we know that vehicles go. Now, beyond that. Now, the thing is that you go, well, what else can we do? And back 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I probably would have said it's still your best thing to do, if you can. I mean, but we don't want to chop down trees. Right, that's the first one. Second of all is, well, back then, there wasn't a better alternative because putting a barrier up was, yes, it was a lower risk, but if you could clear those fixed hazards, that was a better safety outcome. But barrier technology has just gone off the charts. It is amazing now. And actually we've discovered, lots of research around this, is that a barrier system at about 4 to 6 meters is safer than a cleared area. That's interesting, isn't it? And the reason for that is that if you keep providing that, the rollover crashes come into play, and the ability to go beyond that. So wide cleared areas are not necessarily a safe place to be, hazards beyond rollover. Mind you, you do get pretty good outcome for if for having clear free of hazards for the first 4 to 5 meters. But it's not necessarily the highest alignment we can achieve for safe system principles. Continuous flexible barriers is the highest alignment. So we're not going to be looking at building roads like this into the future, which thankfully now the new Austroads guide, which is just very recently released, doesn't sort of have this in mind. The one before it, 2020, certainly did. But we know vehicles will go over, hit other vehicles, run off the road there, run off the road there. I don't know why these are there, but then they've sprouted out, but they'll hit those. But a continuous barrier system would be the go. Because this road environment was all trying to only address the likelihood. Sealed shoulders, audio tactile edge line, center line, cleared areas. It's all likelihood. When the crashes end up happening, the severity is just as bad. So there's the new Part 6, which alters the way of thinking. I'm not going to go into that. But we've done these very sort of cartoony style, just high alignment with safe system principles to low alignment. And you can see there, we've got continuous barrier system, flexible barrier systems, the bumper bowling of roads, some people like to call it. And it sort of alters and you can move things around depending, but I'm not going to spend any more time on that. This is an interesting one to see though. Here, if you've got this wide sort of median cleared and you've got some cleared roadside, if any of you know OSRAP or IRAP, the star rating of roads for safety, the same way you sort of star rate fridges and and energy use, we star rate roads. We certainly do a fair bit of that. There's an official protocol on how you do it and what everything that goes into it, but you can give it a star rating. That's a 4-star road, but this is a 5-star road with that central barrier and outer barriers. So it's a safer thing. It actually takes up less cross-section as well, interestingly, so it could be cheaper to get better at safe system alignment. I won't go through all those cross sections. They're in your notes if you want to have a look at some star ratings of different cross sections and the like, and there's a couple of Austroads guides. But we do need to be very aware of the the details of how we roll out these systems and the like. And I just popped this one in because it's interesting where you look at the risk from just a normal perspective of vehicles breaking down and being struck, and it's very, very low. Like it's not a risk. Far, far greater risk if we were to leave roadside exposed. But the community perception of risk is fascinating, and you cannot underestimate that in your ability to roll out public infrastructure. And this one just, people went absolutely berserk. A very long, continuous barrier systems at an offset, an awkward offset like that. So just have a think about, pullover bays and getting good offset. There's lots of different information available about barrier design and continuous barrier systems, but we certainly don't have time in this course to go through that. We've got a 3-day course on barriers design if you're interested in going into a lot of those details, and some of you already know a lot of that detail as well. The last thing I just want to point out about that thinking about energy management, energy absorption, is this one, which is a wrap the cushion. I'm not like it is just a product. There are many products out there. I don't have any allegiance to this one. I just like the idea of it. So that's a wrap the cushion for those who never seen it. And what it is, it's like this device. It's sort of got a honeycomb center, so it absorbs some energy, but that's not its best energy absorbing or energy characteristic. It's not fixed to the ground or anything like that, or to the pole, because when a vehicle strikes it, it rotates, right? And its angles are, in the way it's set up, it rotates. So what it does is it deflects the energy of the vehicle and moves it along. So it's kind of like martial arts, deflect the energy of the punch. I've never done martial arts in my life. I watched The Karate Kid. So the idea is it rotates, and I just think it's a brilliant way to think about energy management on a fixed hazard like a power pole like this. Now we have challenges with utility providers they get angry about putting this around their assets. I mean, somebody needs to start a class action against some utility providers, in my opinion, in their preservation of asset and utility poles, and then somebody dies hitting a utility pole and they come back and they put a stronger utility pole in the same place because they don't want their asset knocked over again. Just, public safety is not front of mind from that perspective in roads with utility providers, is my experience. But anyway, and they say, no, you can't put that around there because maybe it'll heat up to it, or we can't access it for maintenance. Sorry. Okay, utility provider rant over. This crash, where there was a Raptor cushion around this utility pole, in this very old Ford with 4 male passengers at 2 a.m, the scenario, they've made a mistake, right? And you might get angry and go, but the thing is that somebody decided a Raptor cushion should go around utility poles. This did happen at a roundabout, and I've just sung the praises of roundabouts in a huge way. I think though they were, when they were coming in, other vehicles would have been, if it was 2 a.m, so probably wasn't anybody else there, but they would have been slow looking around. So we've got some advantages there anyway. They've come around, they've left the road, something around 90 kilometers per hour, and they've hit that. They all survived minor injuries. They're all leading a normal, healthy life because, and the big forensic report on it was the Raptor cushion was it. That saved them. I just thought that was quite interesting. Energy management technique, mistake, inappropriate. We don't want it to happen. We've got to try and address that. Keep, working on stopping people doing that. The vehicle shouldn't have been able to go that fast. All of that sort of stuff. But the end result, because of the energy absorption, was they survived. All right, Max. Enough of my ranting. Over to you.
No problem.
You can take people through the assignment.
Absolutely. So I'll share my screen to Moodle. Hopefully everyone can see what is up there. A few resources I just added from today's module. There's a little video here, which is an example of a turbo roundabout in Torquay, or Anglesey Way and Surf Coast Highway in Victoria. And that's just a really good kind of 360-degree, beautifully done artistic rendition of how that looks. That has actually now been installed, but that video kind of takes you through it. So worth a flick through if you want to get an idea of how that looks. Also, the Austroads report there for the raised safety platforms under the resources tab. So feel free to download that if you haven't had a look over that. And the Vic Roads road design note is in the reference documents and resources tab, that one there. We'll hop straight into the quiz and the assignment for today. So there is a quiz, and just as module 1 quiz, you just click on that and click on attempt quiz. For the assignment, however, slightly different approach. You'll have to download this Word document. So you can click on that and that will start downloading. And I've already opened it up because sometimes it crashes on me, which just looks embarrassing for me. So here's one I prepared earlier. The instructions are written at the top here. And what you're going to have to do is you're going to be selecting an intersection. It can be any intersection that you want. It can be the one at your local street. It could be at your kid's school or perhaps near work, any intersection that you want. And then we're asking you to fill out a table that's on the page overleaf. And you also have to inspect the intersection. You don't have to go out there on site, just via Google Street View, or if you're familiar with it, if it's at the end of your street, maybe have a walk down. But what we're after is we want to identify particular factors that relate to exposure, likelihood, and severity. So I will hop onto the next page, but all you'll need to do on this page is just insert your name and also a link to the intersection that you are investigating. So here's the table we're after you to fill in. We're after a minimum of one factor and a maximum of 3 for each of these. And this is why Ken has been identifying all of the treatments and reiterating if they're got to do with exposure, likelihood, or severity, because this is your first assignment and you'll be doing that yourself. So we'll look at things that can influence either increase or decrease the risk of exposure. You can jot down some notes in there. Some factors that increase or influence likelihood, you can jot down some notes there, and increase or influence severity and jot down some notes there. We also have this other row, and we're asking for anything that could change within that environment that would reduce the impact of your exposure, likelihood, and severity. So in other words, you're starting to think of what could actually be done within that environment that would either change the exposure, the number of units within that area, the number of vehicles, the number of pedestrians, cyclists, etc. That would either reduce the likelihood of a particular crash type occurring or reduce the severity on the risk. So there's only one that we need for this row here, and 1 to 3 for the ones above. What we'll get you to do is, if you save a local copy of that on your computer, you can then hop back up into Moodle and you can click on Add Submission. And the reason we get everyone to do this through Moodle, it just makes sure that we get a notification that you've submitted it and it's ready for grading. We then review it. We provide you some commentary on how things align with what we would expect. And we will also pass on any feedback through Moodle as well. So it's all kind of done within this system here. So if you do have any questions about the assignment though, there's you can of course email myself or Ken, and we'll be happy to respond to those queries. But all the actual submission of the assignment is lodged on Moodle. So hopefully that makes sense. I think I'll just touch on also with the assignment, sorry Ken, before you jump in. We're not necessarily looking for the most detailed review of this particular intersection, and if you're worried that you're not capturing all the risks associated with that intersection, you're not going to be graded on that. You are just graded on if you are correctly putting things in the right column, if it's got to do with exposure, if it's got to do with likelihood, if it's got to do with severity. So it's not the whole big picture. It's not a full SSA we're getting you to do. We just want to make sure that, yes, you've understood those 3 different factors and which elements of the road infrastructure relate to those factors. Ken?
Yeah, no, beautifully done there, Max. Yes, exactly what I was going to say. You don't need to go into an intense, full find every risk and the like. We just want to ensure that you're getting categorization right. And at the start of next session, we'll see if anybody wants to volunteer for us to jump into their site via Street View, and they can talk us through the issues and the exposure and the likelihood and severity. So there's a bit of interaction there. Next session's all about vulnerable road users, pedestrian cyclists, motorcyclists, and that sort of thinking. So a couple of questions had popped up, which I think are going to be covered nicely in the next session. Anything else, Max, or are we going to give people sort of 5 minutes to do their quiz and jump in and start their assignment?
Yep, I just thought the due date for that particular assignment is Monday, but if you can get in earlier, that's always good for us, so we can grade it and have a look at the assignments before our next module. And another question that came through was, how long do we get access to Moodle after the course? Which I don't actually know the answer to. So do you know that one, Ken, or I can follow up with our...
Yeah, I think it's about 3 months or something. Okay. But the thing is, yeah, we suggest you just download any of the resources you want. Maybe put them onto that memory stick that should have arrived in your thing, and then you've got all of the ones that were originally loaded up already on that memory stick, and you can just add any new bits and pieces as you go. All right.
Fabulous. Thanks, Ken. And yes, have a great day, everyone, and good luck with the assignment and the quiz for today.
Yeah, get in contact if you've got any questions or a bit confused or the like. We are happy to have a chat to you further.
Take care. Thanks, guys.
Bye.